Hey, this is Nicole Kelly, host of Loud and Proud. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
This is Katie, co-host of Coffee with Keith and Katie here on Public House Media. Once you are done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Coffee with Keith and Katie, where we talk about the adventures of our daily lives and relationship. A new show comes out every Tuesday and Friday at 8:30 p.m. Central. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of Coffee with Keith and Katie. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Welcome to How to Write Good. I'm your host, Daniel Poppie. Find out more about me at danielpoppie.com. I got some stuff up there. Check out How to Write Good on Facebook. If you do enjoy How to Write Good, please like and share what's posted. If you listen to an episode, even if it's not on Facebook, if you would, it'd be really helpful to me if you just go over to Facebook, like and share it. If you share it, it's even better. But if you like it, that's still good. But it's really your preference because it's a really big help. So if you know anyone, I was actually talking to someone I met. Well, it's someone I know more recently, like not somebody I've known for a long time. And so he plays shows. And the first time I met him was at one of his shows. Like it was a smaller thing at like a coffee shop essentially. And it's surprising, a coffee shop that has shows. I guess it's a thing around this area. I think most coffee shops I've been to don't, and I think it's this town specifically. But I was just like, I'm curious what else he does. So I asked him about whether if he makes more music, if he has any other shows, and he told me, I have some stuff that is on Spotify and iTunes, and I totally forgot what Spotify was for half a second, or I forgot what the name was. But that was cool. So I looked it up, and it's just cool when people, I find it really interesting when people make things. They come up with things in their head. He's one person I know. I have a very good friend who he used to, I don't know if he writes music anymore, but I think there are certain people that I've run into who just they think a little differently about music and different things like that. And my friend, he wrote music. He has a music degree and another degree as well. And it's just talking to him about music, like seeing his stuff, hearing his stuff is really cool. I like that a lot. But yeah, so it's a really big help to anyone if they make anything. And I'm not necessarily talking about myself. It's of course a big help to me. But if you know someone else who makes something, or they're trying to do something, or someone who's even an entrepreneur, they're just like, I'm going to go out and do this. I think it's most people don't do that. And because most people don't do it, I think a lot of people, or at least maybe it's my perception only, a lot of people either have a perception like, oh, that's not going to work, or they have a perception like, oh, that's really, really cool, but they're not really supportive at the same time. You know what I mean? Like they're not extremely interested in what the person is doing. They're just kind of like, oh, that's cool, like good for you, and they leave them to themselves. Or they're sometimes they think, oh, like that's never going to work. And I come across, or I pay attention to more to the that's never going to work that's never going to work comments than the supportive ones. But I'm still here despite all those comments. So I'm not going to go anywhere. But like and share if you enjoy the podcast. Check out Public House Media. They allow this podcast to happen. They're a smaller thing that's going on. And I think right now, this is episode 11, 12, something like that. I think it's episode 12. I think this is a full 3 months of shows, which is kind of weird. It feels like I just started this, and it doesn't feel like there's been 12 shows. Maybe this is 13. I can't remember. You're listening to this. I just record the shows, and I don't really necessarily put a number to them until I'm done recording them. And there's always a lot of things on my mind, and I don't really have a good memory for this stuff like that. But yeah, there's about 20 to 25 people who are who've been listening to this, or maybe it's a big mix of anything. But those of you who are listening to this, if you're one of those 25, it's a big thanks to you. I think it's really cool. When I'm making this, I have a lot of doubts in terms of whether it's going to be I'm not like someone who's like, oh, this is going to be the biggest thing in the world. I think it's a very niche podcast. I think it's a very there's a very small group of people out of the whole population think this is really interesting. But it's a big help when you have that many people, and it's only been 12 episodes, and there's constantly about 20 to 25 people-ish or something like that, maybe up to 30, who are listening to this. And I think that's cool. I was just looking back, and I haven't been doing this very often, and I saw that my first episode got like 90 listens and downloads, and I'm like, oh, that's really cool, because I wasn't expecting it to ever get that high this fast. So yeah, I really appreciate that you listen. A lot of times I think, oh, like, who's going to listen to me? But I guess there's enough content to think it's interesting. So I really appreciate it. Thank you for you who are in that group, if you do. And we're going to jump right into our word of the week, because I know that you love the word of the week. I know that it's your favorite aspect of this show, because it's just good to have more vocabulary. Actually, so I've been trying to have more vocabulary that's useful, that I think people would actually use. These are words. More recently, I think that, sposh, there's that one word, sposh. I'm never going to use that word because it's stupid. I may use that word ironically, but I think it sounds dumb. Okay, you can think it's a cool word. Like, you have every right to your opinion. I feel like an idiot when I say it. But since it is winter, we are doing winter words, and it right before Christmas, actually right before Christmas in the Midwest, it got really, really cold. So the Friday before Christmas, it was like 40 degrees where I live. And we drove to the other side of the state. My wife and I drove to the other side of the state, and where my parents live, it was about 10 degrees. And then over the weekend, that weekend before Christmas, that's when we were celebrating with my family, it just dropped everywhere. And then we got back home, and it was like in the teens, or maybe like below the teens, in the single digits, and then it dropped into the negatives. So there was a day last week or the week before, no, that was like 2 weeks ago or something like that, where it was colder here than in Antarctica. And of course it is summer in Antarctica, but it's crazy. It's unbelievable. But the thing about it is, if you don't live in a cold climate, I don't think you realize how cold is. If you don't, you don't realize how bad it is, because you can acclimate to the cold weather. And I usually do. And I think that the teens is fairly comfortable when you have warm clothes on. But when it gets below zero, I was scraping off the car. You have to scrape off the car. You have to wipe up the car, unfortunately. And my hands, they hurt. They were so cold. Like, almost instantly, I got outside, my hands were extremely cold, and they were hurting that it was so cold. But we're going to jump into our words. The first word, and we have two this week, and I'll explain why. You'll see why. I don't have to. You can figure it out. I'm not explaining why we have two words. You can just figure it out. The first word is brumation, and that's a state of sluggishness or an activity. And it's usually used with reptiles. So reptiles, when they get cold, they start to be more sluggish, and they don't move as much or anything like that. And the second word is brumal. And brumal, all that means is something that happens in the cold weather. Okay, so snow is brumal because it's something that happens in cold weather, unless you live in Canada and you have snow all year round, because it doesn't get above 30 degrees in Canada. So we're going to jump into our accidental essence. This might be a shorter show, but I think I said it might be a shorter show last show, and it was long. So you never know what's going to happen on this show. I never know exactly how long it's going to take. What I try to do is I try to wrap it up right around the 28-minute mark, so I get done at 30 minutes, because I'm supposed to have a 30-minute podcast. But I always have like something I'm trying to explain and something I'm trying to go through, and I always go longer than I want to. Okay, so we're going to jump into this. What I'm talking about this week is what I think is the most important aspect of a story, and that is character. Okay, so before I start going into this, or the characters in the story, before I start going into this, so this podcast, and I don't know if I've explained this fully or anything. I think I've made jokes about it and different things like that. But this podcast its name is How to Write Good. And part of that name is to get under people's skin, because there is a contingency of people on the internet who, even though they have the ability to talk to thousands and thousands of people, decide that how they're going to do it is by correcting their grammar. They're going to interact with people on the internet by correcting their grammar. And I think, like, a lot of times, and I think I do this to people actually a lot, so I'm kind of a hypocrite when it comes to this. I think people say something, and I under my breath, I usually am like, well, that's not exactly right. And I think I mentioned it before. My brother-in-law was actually making fun of me for it, so he's kind of mimicking me. But that's all right. That's okay, because I think I do it. So it's essentially that, but it's about grammar. So if somebody says something, and if somebody does something in grammar that is, or they say something or use grammar incorrectly, they use words incorrectly so as to be bad grammar, whatever. There is a tendency, if there's a tendency, there's an itch. You're like, man, I really want to correct them because I know that's wrong. And I think, for me, I have to hold myself back. I have to be like, no, I'm not going to do that. But I did that to kind of get under, to not take it so seriously, to not take things so seriously, because in my opinion, you don't necessarily have to have good grammar to write a really good story. And that's what I'm focusing on. My wheelhouse, so the main area of what I think I'm more of an expert in, if I'm an expert in anything, is fiction and storytelling and different things like that. So I don't think you have to have perfect grammar. I think you can tell a story. I think that you need to look past people's bad grammar to look at their actual ideas. And you can be like, hey, this is the wrong way to put this together. This isn't correct grammar. But a lot of people take themselves really seriously. They're like, oh, this is bad grammar. I can't believe they use that. And I'm here, and this podcast is here to annoy you, if you like doing that. And I guess it's to annoy myself, and it's to not take myself so seriously. But it's also asking a question or saying how to write something good. So think of the good as a noun instead of a verb. Okay, so it's how to write something good. So this topic this week is trying to answer, how do you write something good, essentially. It's trying to get to the heart of what the title of the show is. And one aspect, so I'm presenting characters, good characters, well-written characters, as the most important aspect of how to write something good. Not how to write well, so not how to have really flowy script that sounds really good, but just how to get to the core, how to connect to people on a basic level that's going to connect to all different people. So I present characters as that. And if you think about characters, and I have this deja vu that I've done this before, and even if I've done this before, you can send me a message on Facebook like, hey, you just did the exact same podcast topic that you've done on this episode. But there's a lot of episodes. I can't really remember. Who knows what's going on anymore. But I feel like I've talked about this before. But there is a podcast episode that I've done already. There's an episode. I don't need to say podcast. There's an episode I've done already that relates to this, but it's a little different. I think characters are the most important part in the story, because think about story elements for a bit. You got setting. Okay, so setting technically doesn't have anything to do with characters. It can, if the setting is made by humans. So if it's in a city, technically the city is built by humans. If it's in the woods or anything like that, then it's not. But setting doesn't have anything to do with characters. Plot. So your setting and your plot. So plot definitely has something to do with characters, because there are certain elements in a story. So if you have a cataclysmic event, if you have a natural disaster within a story, something that is out of the control of characters, if you have man versus nature, then that's happening, and it's not because of the characters. But the interesting part of the story comes in when you actually have somebody reacting to that. Okay, and if you think about it, it's man versus nature. It's not nature versus nature. How interesting would that be? There is, somebody might be like, well, there's bunnies, there's Watership Down, and there's bunnies, and that's really interesting. Well, the reason why Watership Down is so stinking interesting is because the bunnies are anthropomorphized. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. I know how to say the word correctly. I don't know how to say it correctly right now. It's one of those times. It's one of those days. All right. So the reason why they're taking on human characteristics, otherwise Watership Down would just be bunnies walking around. Bunnies don't kill each other. Bunnies don't go to war. People do. And war is interesting because you're like, whoa, there's all this stuff going on. There's people dying. There's people. So there's there's an old saying, or there's someone said that, someone who they actually are. And I think that's one of the interesting things. So even that statement, if you write a story that's focused around war, or if you write about a war itself, it doesn't focus on the natural elements. War has to have a human component. And the thing that makes it so interesting, the thing that when you write a character, when you put a character in difficult situations, when you write a struggle of a character, you're trying to bring out who the character is, or you're trying to change the character some way. So if a plot needs a character to happen. A plot needs a character to be interesting. So, or you have the action, and the action is another aspect of the plot, essentially. But I was just looking at something today, and it was actually it was talking about. And maybe I'll put it up. I don't know if it's interesting enough to put up. It was on a YouTube thing, and it was talking about how DC and Marvel is more successful than DC for its movies right now. And the person was saying, oh, well, the reason why Marvel is more successful is because there's continuity in the characters, meaning that the characters are a specific type of character and they change, but they don't change in like a snap way. Like, so from one movie to the other, they don't suddenly change. There's a character development that goes on that's shown on screen. And then this person was saying that, hey, Marvel movies are better than DC movies because DC, like there's not as many DC movies, of course, but with DC movies, they're all standalone. And Marvel decided, hey, we have to I'm almost certain Marvel did this. So there's like a Marvel studio, and there's someone in charge of Marvel movies, and they're saying, we have to okay it before you put out this movie. And there's got to be a group of people or several people or even one person who says, hey, this has to have continuity. This has to go together in this specific way. This has to make sense. You can't suddenly change the character of one of these characters, one of these people in the movies. You can't change the character of one of the superheroes. It has to go that way. Maybe it's not like that. Maybe it just happened. I doubt that it happened like that because stories are a lot more complicated and making movies are really complicated. So you'd think that it get messed up somewhere if they didn't do that. But they were saying, hey, DC movies, like there's the only DC movies that are really good are ones that actually show a character arc. And they were saying, and the whole entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, whatever you want to call it, is better, like overall, than all these DC movies. So if you put them on a scale, the Marvel movies, not the fact that there's more, it's not the fact that there's more, it's the fact that all the characters develop throughout the movies. So the development of the characters makes sense. It doesn't suddenly switch. And the reason why this person was saying, they're like, well, the thing about these, the person who's watching a movie is connecting to the characters, and they grow to understand that character, and then they see that character develop, and that's the most interesting part. And there is something to be said about this idea that people like seeing themselves in a movie. Okay, so here's one thing. This is something interesting. Well, I think it's interesting, but I think most things are interesting. Maybe I don't think most things are interesting. Maybe I think there's a lot of things that I think are interesting. But when you write, I think that a lot of inexperienced writers, and I probably fall into this myself, and I'm not going to exclude myself from this, but I think a lot of inexperienced writers tend to write themselves into characters. And I'm not going to talk about why this happens. I think that unless you go into like science fiction and hard science fiction, typically stories revolve around characters, and writers write themselves as characters. They probably know themselves better. They see themselves more. But maybe one of the reasons why they write themselves as characters is because, okay, they've got all this information about themselves. Maybe they think, or subconsciously, they think that they are the most interesting person they know. And someone might be like, no, and some writer or somebody listening to this may be like, no, I write, and I don't think I'm the most interesting person I know. But the thing about it is I write, and I would be one of those people saying, hey, I'm not the most interesting person I know. But at the same time, I think like I said, I probably do have a tendency to write myself into characters a little bit. And the reason why is because I've got so much information about myself to put into a story. And I think one of the things that allows a writer to write characters so well is to be able to reflect on themselves and then see, oh, I've got this, this, and this. I can break down these pieces. I can see how my own thought process goes. I can see my own emotions and how they affect me and what I do and how I react. So you're taking all the information, and I think that you wouldn't be writing that into a story generally unless you did find it interesting, unless you did find it compelling. So maybe it is the case that writers write themselves into stories because they think they're the most interesting things. On the flip side, or maybe it's not on the flip side, maybe this is like a die, and they're actually right next to each other, these faces. So on the flip side, I think people think that people are the most interesting things in books. Okay? So if people think people are the most interesting things in books, then writing really good characters, writing really good people or characters, it doesn't even have to be people. Okay, let's just say characters, because but the thing about it is people. It always is people, because even if you're writing Monsters Inc., you're still presenting them as a person, presenting them as a human that just looks different. So I think that people think that people are the most interesting things in stories. The characters are the most interesting things. Wouldn't it make sense then that if the characters are the most interesting things in stories, that the characters are the most focused upon when writing, making sure those characters are really stinking good? Because, and when you think about, okay, so when I think about stories I really like, I think that there are certain parts of stories that I'm like, well, that was really cool. But generally, it's quotes from the stories that make it really cool, or an action that a character takes that make it really cool. Action of either the character with the environment, a character with another character, the character with himself, if you look at Fight Club or things like that. A character that there's an interaction of the character with something or someone, and that is what makes the story really cool. It's not that so there are really cool visuals. There are some movies with like, wow, that was amazing visuals. And unless you're someone who films things, I don't think you notice them as much. Like, it's the same thing with movie music. My friend who I was talking to about before, who went to school for music, who is a really good friend of mine, he always notices the music in movies. And maybe I'm wrong. If you're listening and you hear this and you're like, no, I don't, you can totally tell me. But from music in movies, I'm having a hard time talking it. I think I always do. He always notices the music in movies, and he always comments on it. And I'm like, well, I kind of noticed it, but I didn't notice it the same way you did. But he really appreciates that. And the reason why he appreciates it is because he has a music degree. And in the same way, if someone generally enjoys the visuals in a movie, you have to actually switch yourself over to enjoy the visuals of that movie. You actually have to think differently. You actually have to be trained in that area, or you have to have an interest in it. But I don't think you have to have an interest in actually watching the movie for the characters and having those character moments in the movies that make it really, really good. So, for instance, if you go back to some really popular movies, so if you go to, so it's Christmas time. One of the most famous villains of all time is Hans Gruber from Die Hard, and the reason why he is great is because of the way he's acted. So it's specifically related to the character. People really like Die Hard, but they in particular like Hans Gruber because of how the late Alan Rickman portrays him. Or you think back to, so you need a specific character to connect to, and I don't know exactly why this is. Maybe it's the case that, so in video games you kind of take on the role of someone in the video game. You kind of think of yourself as doing these things, but in movies you see someone else doing it, so you're vicariously experiencing these things either through a movie or a book or some other form of media. And I think that's part of it. It might like, the thing about it is too, I talked about characters and how you shouldn't have characters you dislike because it is fiction and you probably should enjoy it, but also these are human beings and there's always some redemptive value in a human being. So I talked about that a few podcasts ago. But when you present a character, like it gives you a window into how someone else thinks, okay? This is another reason why people like video games, is because it allows them to do things, and I just said vicariously living or doing things through video games, but it allows them to do things that they wouldn't have otherwise be able to do. And when you watch a movie, it allows you to experience things that you would not otherwise be able to experience. And in particular, so there's this idea of like Breaking Bad. People really, really like Breaking Bad. One of the reasons why people like Breaking Bad is because at the beginning of the movie, he like started out as, and the reason why people like Breaking Bad, okay, so there are certain characters people really, really dislike in Breaking Bad. The characters people love, the parts about Breaking Bad people love are the characters and what the characters do. So the actions of the characters. So at the beginning of Breaking Bad, what makes that such a cool show, and it's not appropriate for everyone, of course, but what makes that such a cool show is that he starts out a weakling. The main character in Breaking Bad starts as a weakling. He starts as somebody you don't really. I didn't really like him at the beginning of the story. I pitied him. I'm like, just go away. You feel sorry for him. You're like, oh man, he's just pathetic. And then he goes through this transformation where he turns into a criminal, and he's really hardened. And it's just a great transformation. It's really, really subtle. And it's just like at the end of the movie, you think back to who he was at the beginning of the movie. You're like, the show, not the movie, and you're like, whoa, that's like at the end of the show, he's vicious. He's an awful person. So, but imagine if character wasn't so focused on in that show. Imagine if they dialed back on the character, how uninteresting that show would be. And in part, you're put in a position where, you're put in a position in that show when you're writing the show that you kind of have to develop characters. And that, I guess, as a writer, you should seek out ways to develop characters. You should put characters in position. You should make a premise of your book. You should create a world in your book that allows the character to develop. But yeah, so I think that making a really good character and making really good characters is going to make your whatever you're writing so much better. Man, I was going to say more better. I should have said more better. I should just use bad grammar all the time. Yeah, I think that's good. But this also goes back to, so I talked about why people enjoy, I think I did. I talked about why people enjoy different types of stories in the past, and I spent a whole podcast episode on that. But, and I talked about how people have different experiences, therefore they're going to experience things differently, and they're going to view art. They're going to like different types of art. They're going to like different types of stories. What if one of those things is that they, people watch a lot of TV, so it's connected to TV. When I watch TV or I read a book or anything like that, and you get the thoughts and the ideas and what the characters say and how they act. When the characters' actions make sense to me, I like stuff better. And there is a cloud of experience around me that makes me understand what characters do, right? I have to collect information. I have to gather information. I have to process the information. Even if my processing is wrong, I'm going to come to conclusions. If I say, that was really stupid, like this doesn't make any sense in this world, why would somebody do that? Nobody would actually do this in real life. Now, maybe they would. Maybe I'm wrong. But if it makes sense to me, or if the way that the characters are presented kind of click into my worldview, maybe not my worldview, but my view of, I guess worldview, yeah, that's going to be better when I watch the show. If it clicks into my desires better, even if I have fantasies about things, if I have specific ideas, if there's a specific story I want to see, if there's a specific feeling I want to feel, if there's a specific content area that I'm interested in, I'm going to have that. If that's presented in a story, that's going to be more interesting to me because of my experiences and who I am than someone who has no experience in those areas. So for me, like it's the difference between, for me, it's I want to see movies that are typically geared towards guys, movies that are more like grittier. Man, I'm more double, not superlative. Superlative would be most best, but movies that are grittier. And I want to see stuff like that. Whereas my wife wants to watch romantic comedy sometimes, not all the time. And I don't necessarily want to watch gritty movies all the time, but she doesn't like gritty stuff at all. And I don't like romantic comedies generally at all. So our experiences or who we are doesn't fit into the character presented. And I think gritty movies are kind of like a male fantasy in a way. And I think that's okay. And I think that romantic comedies are kind of a female fantasy in a way. And of course, there's always variation. There's always girls who like grittier movies and always guys who like romantic comedies, but it's a generalization. It's on a bell curve. Most fit into that middle portion. But yeah, I think that the experience of the people will make them like that more. So maybe one reason why people, well, I already said this before, but one reason why people enjoy different stories is because they have different life experiences. They are different people, and they're connecting to the characters in a different way because they see themselves in the character. They have different interests or different things like that. Oh, I have 2 more minutes to finish this up. Awesome. So usually I get to like 33 and I haven't even finished the accidental essence yet. So that's what I have for you today. We're going to jump into the logical fallacy. I'm doing ad hominems, however you want to say it. And the logical fallacy of the week is genetic fallacy. And what this is, I'm not doing ad hominems, I'm doing red herrings. Gosh, I'm doing red herring fallacies. And red herrings, if you can't remember, is essentially a distraction from the argument. Okay, so anything that distracts from the actual argument is a red herring. Okay, so a genetic fallacy is dismissing something based on its origin rather than its current meaning or context. Okay, so the one thing that popped into my mind is the Nazis did a lot of scientific experiments when they were in power in Germany during World War II. And there are specific textbooks and there's specific information we got from them that is really accurate. There are specific drawings, I think, that we got from the Nazis, anatomy and anatomical models that we got from the Nazis that are really, really good. Like, they're really good. I'm pretty sure they still use them in some cases because they were just that good. And if you were arguing for the use of that, saying, oh, this came from the Nazis, we shouldn't use it, but in the current context, it's like, these are the best that's ever been done. Why wouldn't we use these? So that's one thing. Maybe my what I said there is a logical fallacy in itself, because as a I don't really like the Nazis, and by saying I don't really like the Nazis, I don't like the Nazis. That's what I mean. But maybe it's just me not liking them and being like, oh, that horrible things, and people could say stuff. But yeah, so if there's a specific if there's something in the world and there's a specific, or like if it comes from a bad place, or maybe let's just think of it like this. So let's just say there is a logical argument and it's presented by someone who isn't a very good person. And then you say, oh, well, this is a good argument because of this, 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 and this. And then someone says, well, that awful person made that argument. That's a genetic fallacy. But you would come back, you'd be like, well, no, it's still a good argument despite the fact that an awful person made it. The thing about this is there's such a two-dimensional view of like what comes from people. So I've never seen Hitler's artwork, but if he was a really good artist, he was a really good artist, right? Like, if he made phenomenal artwork, it doesn't suddenly make his artwork worse because he's Hitler. Or does it? That's the question, right? Or you have like information coming from different people, or you have certain cultures. Like, there's been a lot of, I'm pretty sure. So there's reports of cultures that would essentially sacrifice babies. There's a culture that they had hands, they had like a god, and they had like a brazen, like it was a red hot pan, like hands, and they'd put the baby on there and the baby would essentially fry to death. I think that's correct. But there are cultures that sacrifice babies, or if you think about the Spartan culture. So the Spartan culture, let's focus on that right now. The Spartan culture would look at the baby, they'd say, okay, this baby has deformities. And they'd be like, okay, we're not going to keep this baby because it has deformities or something wrong with it. And they'd chuck it off a cliff. And they do that. That's how they function. Now, there were certain things that, like, the Spartans were really good warriors at the same time. So we can't say, oh, they killed their babies. They had the babies and they chucked them off cliffs, or they did this and this and this. We always try to, like, or I think it's a tendency, because it's easy. I think it's lazy thinking, but I think we have a tendency to simplify things and say, oh, this person's awful, therefore nothing good can come from this person. And the truth is that if the Nazis somehow won the war, which I don't really think there's a way they would have been able to. I think that a lot of historians say that even if they would have eventually collapsed and not been able to win the war anyways because of logistics, I believe, and different things like that. But even if they won the war, they would have killed all the Jews in Europe. But there were some plans for architecture that was really kind of amazing architecture. So there's the Arch in France, and Hitler wanted to make a huge roundabout in Berlin and make a huge arch. And the truth is that arch and that roundabout, the way that he wanted to set up Berlin, would have looked really cool, but at the same time it would have been essentially a monument to someone awful. Now, would it have been good art? That's the question. I'm not sure. Would it have even worked? But we always simplify it. We always say, oh, like that person is evil. That person's awful. I don't like that person. You have this view of this person, and you forget the fact that the person isn't a human being, and there's good and bad that comes with being a human being. I've said this before. I talked about this at another episode. Hitler had a fiance. Why in the world? Like, somebody saw humanity in him, and she may have had horrible ideas herself. And there are a lot of people in Germany who were just regular people who didn't take part in killing people and different things like that. But you make someone not into a human being. So yeah, I think that's what happens with the genetic fallacy. They're like, well, this came from here, so nothing good can come from there, when that's not actually true. Okay, I'm done. And of course, I went 5 minutes over because that's what I do now these days. I can't actually go 30 minutes anymore because I just talk too stinking much. All right, so my name is Daniel Poppie. I hope your New Year's was good. I know it's already passed, but I hope your New Year's went well. I hope your January goes well. I hope it is not as cold where you live as it is here. Have a good rest of your day. Have a good rest of your week. Have a good rest of your whatever. See you later.